Well, I don't know about you, but that was incredibly insightful. I thought Ms. Dawson was able to not only answer some questions, but also raise other questions that only the Prime Minister can answer. Questions about the trip itself being a bad choice right from the start, that if Mr. Trudeau had asked Ms. Dawson for her advice or permission, that she would likely have said no. That the whole and central argument that the Liberals have been using, Mr. Trudeau had been using for months now, is that friendship excluded him from being in a conflict of interest. Not only did Ms. Dawson refute that in her report, that seeing somebody for a few minutes in 30 years does not qualify them as a friend, but even if he had been a friend, that this trip would have broken the ethical act of Parliament in different ways. So Mr. Trudeau continuing to use an argument that would have put him in violation but in a different way is a strange thing for him to be using. The last couple of points. Ms. Dawson told us it was in October, I think, that she gave the draft report without recommendations and conclusions. I think that it was she said October in the meeting. I think it was November. Her last interview with Mr. Trudeau was at the end of October. She might correct that later, I'm not sure. The fact remains, though, that Mr. Trudeau had an advanced copy of where this report was going, knew that the whole friendship argument was not going to get him out of trouble, and continued to use it. Continued to use it last night in public meetings. I don't understand both his logic and the ethical compass that this Prime Minister has that would put him in this situation.
He seems to have learned from it, and we saw that he just went to Revelstoke. What more do you want from him?
Well, I'm not. Well, what do I want from him?
No, but what does he have to do?
Well, he has to answer a couple of things. Are there any other instances like this where Mr. Trudeau used the excuse of a friendship that wasn't a friendship in order to take great benefit? Secondly, I've yet to hear a commitment from the Prime Minister or any Liberals that the Act must be improved, that these loopholes about friendship, about direct ownership, indirect ownership, as we saw with Mr. Morneau, those loopholes need to be done away with. Ms. Dawson has, I think, 89 or so recommendations she's put forward. This government has failed to commit to act on any of those. We need to improve the rules that govern Parliament. We heard a Liberal in there today say, the rules are so hard. It was so hard getting elected. Everything changed. And that people should simply trust us. I don't know what planet Liberals are living on, because their Prime Minister just got found to have broken 4 of the provisions of the Act. And they're saying, just trust us.
Ms. Dawson said we should get away with the friendship exemption.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yes.
Why?
Well, because when does somebody who's lobbying the government become a friend? And does that now exempt an MP from taking all sorts of gifts? It seems like a loophole that will allow somebody to take benefit from holding public office that they wouldn't get if they weren't elected to public office, which is the whole point of ethics and conflict of interest rules, is so that people don't use their position to benefit themselves or their family.
Isn't there a risk that you happen having no friends at all once you get elected?
I think it was in the West Wing that said the president doesn't make new friends. I was thinking of that line all the way through today, because what happens in the context of someone wanting to be your friend if you're Prime Minister, you'd have to be pretty naive or stupid to think the only reason they want to be your friend is because you're just such a wonderful guy, that it's got nothing to do with the extraordinary power you have as Prime Minister. Now, naivete and stupidity are difficult to legislate out, but we certainly need rules that govern us to prevent people from exploiting their position and exposing themselves, as Mr. Trudeau has done, to a conflict of interest, as Ms. Dawson reported to all Canadians. And I don't know if Mr. Trudeau has learned. I honestly don't, because he continues to use the same arguments that would lead him into a different place of trouble. So, and what has changed? What has changed? I need to see, and what consequences have there been? I think this is an important thing. Mr. Trudeau laid out rules for his cabinet ministers and said, not only are you not allowed to be in a conflict of interest, not even in the appearance of a conflict of interest. Well, then what? I imagine he put these rules out so there'd be some sort of consequence. He broke these rules himself. What's the consequence been? Other than the public shaming, as Ms. Dawson talked about, that's it.
There are no penalties.
There are no. So know this, that Liberals, when we reviewed that Act back in 2013, I looked through some of the Liberals' questioning. They said this is just a slap on the wrist. This is a joke. This is what Liberals said in committee when we were reviewing the penalty section of this act. Now they're in government, and they say it's fine that there's no penalties, that a couple $100, all those penalties, those monetary, as we learned today, that's just for filing. That's to encourage people to actually get their documents.
But Ms. Dawson said that she doesn't think that any more penalties are required. What do you think of that?
I disagree, actually. I think penalties are required, because clearly it didn't work. That the penalty of public shame was not enough of a deterrent for Mr. Trudeau not to take this trip.
So what kind of penalties would be appropriate?
Well, one of the things the committee considered last time was not only monetary penalties, but not allowing people to take their place in the House of Commons, not allowing MPs, if the penalties are in violation of the Elections Act, there are penalties that can be assumed by the court. I think there could be a gradient, and I think there should be a scale, if you will, depending on what the violation is, from minor ones where someone forgot to file a piece of paper, all the way to somebody who clearly exploited their office and their position to benefit themselves and their family.
Overall, this whole situation just reveals how much the system really is the scandal, and that there are loopholes in the law, that the enforcement is weak because the Ethics Commissioner didn't catch the Prime Minister, and that there are no penalties really other than shaming. Just to say a few other quick things. In terms of penalties, the Ethics Commissioner says other penalties aren't needed. But the rate of violations has not changed since 1985 when these ethics rules were made public. And so obviously something more is needed to discourage the violations, because the violation rate is not going down. And so you need something like monetary penalties that will discourage violations.
What kind of penalties would be appropriate for the Prime Minister in this situation?
Well, I think there should be a sliding scale depending on the seriousness. And for something like this, which violated several measures of the Act, it should be a fine of close to 1 year's salary. That's the kind of thing that we need, shown by the last 30 years of violations, starting in '85 when the rules were first made public, to discourage these violations.
And what about the friend issue?
The Ethics Commissioner kind of hinted at it, but she issued a guideline in 2011 saying very clearly that despite the exception for friends, that friends who are lobbyists who give you gifts, that those gifts are prohibited, and that would be her enforcement policy. So it's been known and public since 2011 that gifts from friends who are lobbyists are illegal, according to the Ethics Commissioner, and so there's really no excuse for any MP, let alone the Prime Minister, to be ignoring that standard.
You said it was the Ethics Commissioner that didn't catch. It was actually, the media, and then the complaints came.
She's never caught anyone in 10 years because she doesn't do audits, which is another thing she needs to be required to do. That's a main thing to strengthen enforcement. You heard her say, and she said this to the committee and to the media several times before, people are good, and that's her assumption. But someone who's enforcing ethics rules should not be assuming that everyone's good. They should be assuming that they don't know whether they're good or bad, and therefore doing inspections and audits to find out whether they are following the rules. But she has refused to do inspections or audits for the last 10 years, and that's why she's never caught anybody.
Does she have the power to do them under the Act?
Sure, anyone who's enforcing the law has a power as an administrative tribunal, which she is, to request information to ensure compliance. So she's just refused to do it, and as you heard her say, she's with an honor system based on her belief that people are good. And that's not, anyone who's enforcing the law should not be assuming that everyone's good.
Mario Dion has said something to that effect as well when he testified at committee.
And it's a very dangerous attitude to see from the new Ethics Commissioner as well, especially someone who has been handpicked by the Trudeau cabinet in violation of the rule that requires consultation with the opposition party leaders. And that's why Democracy Watch will be challenging that appointment in court very soon.
But you say that she hasn't caught anybody, but in the end she did catch a big fish, didn't she?
She didn't catch the big fish. She finally made a good ruling. But she let 95% of people alleged to violate the law off the hook in the last 10 years. She has a confirmed record as a lapdog. And she went out with a bang with one ruling, but a whimper on the rulings on Morneau. So, and overall, her record is as a negligent lapdog that's let 95% of people off the hook. And issued more than 200 secret rulings where she never explained the facts or summarized the reasons why she let people off the hook.
But for the public just watching, don't they see a Prime Minister who says he's sorry, who goes to Revelstoke instead of, a secret island? Is that going to be enough for the public, do you think?
Well, the real test is what happens in the next election, and the past 25 years have shown that if the opposition parties just complain about this and say you did something bad, especially the Conservatives who had a whole bunch of scandals when they were in power for 10 years, that's not going to be enough to shift voters in their direction. They're going to have to promise to clean things up, and we'll see whether they promise to make the changes that are needed to close the loopholes, strengthen enforcement, and strengthen penalties. Just to mention one other quick fact, Democracy Watch has filed a complaint with the lobbying commissioner about the Aga Khan's gift of the trip, and the commissioner's office has confirmed that she is investigating that complaint as a violation of the lobbyist code of conduct.
Okay, great. Thank you.